history here on this special edition. To everyone tuning in live, welcome to our community. Well, some of the history of the Jews of Norway. Now, we see that it actually goes back to the 1400s, respectively. Now, I wasn't able to garner up so much information of the rabbis that were in Norway at different times, but there's a lot of information out there. Although there were very likely Jewish merchants, sailors, and others who entered Norway during the Middle Ages, no efforts were made to establish a Jewish community at that point in time. And I think through the early modern period, Norway, as it was devastated very much by the Black Death, was ruled by Denmark from 1536 all the way to 1814, and then by Sweden until 1905. I think in 1687, Christian V rescinded all Jewish privileges, specifically banning Jews from Norway, except with a special dispensation. And Jews found in this kingdom were jailed and expelled, and this ban would persist until the year, I believe, 1851. So unfortunately, you see anti-Semitism all throughout Jewish places, very much over there. I think it was in 1814 when Norway gained independence from Denmark. The general ban against Jews entering the country was continued. In the new Norwegian constitution, Sephardim were exempt from the ban for some reason. It appears that few applied for a letter of free passage. After tireless efforts by the poet, someone named Henrik Wergeland, and the politician Peder Jensen Forsland, and a school principal named Hans Holmboe, and others, I think it was in 1851, the Norwegian parliament lifted this ban against Jewish people, and they were awarded religious rights on a par with, let's say, Christians, I believe at that point in time, or Christian dissenters, if I'm not mistaken. The first Jewish community in Norway was established in Oslo in 1892. The community grew slowly until the Second World War. It's also, I think, bolstered in the late 1930s and peaked at about 2,100. The population was obviously devastated during the Holocaust, in which a significant portion of Norwegian Jewry, unfortunately, was murdered by Nazi Germany. I think Jews remained one of Norway's smallest ethnic and religious minorities over there. So very interesting. Anyone tuning in live, we're exploring the history of the Jewish community of Norway over on this special edition. Okay, so let's speak a bit now about the Middle Ages. I think the first mention of Jews in the, let's say, Norwegian literature is found on Postola Suga in Iceland in the 13th century, where they are mentioned along with more general pagans, I believe. The literature of this time referred to Jews as, I think, Goyinga or something, or in Latin form Julius. The Jews were also mentioned in, let's say, badder terms in subsequent literary Icelandic sagas, such as Goyinga saga, if I'm not mistaken. They will actually mention and chronicle Ogre, we have to point out. So, unfortunately, there was anti-Semitism all throughout Jewish history. However, I think there are sources that dispute anti-Semitism in Norway in the Middle Ages for the simple reason that there was no evidence of the presence of Jews in the country. I think there's a detailed study, if I'm not mistaken, of contemporaneous documents, for instance, such as testaments, contracts, and legal cases, among other primary data, did not mention Jews or a Jewish community in Norway, apparently. I think other intellectuals or people, researchers, cited that those mentioned in church documents can be considered virtual Jews. I'm not sure about that, or any mention of this. And I think in this sense, the citations were indirect, and let's say their mentions were probably symbols of non-Christian behavior. That's something that we have to point out of it. Let's talk about the Reformation and Enlightenment. I think it was in back in the year 1436, also in 1438, the Archbishop Aslakbold prohibited celebrating a day of rest on Saturday, lest Christians replicate the way of the Jews. So more anti-Semitism. And this prohibition was reinforced through several subsequent ordinances, including those in the Deprimatarian Norwegian. The first known, let's say, settlement of Jews on Norway territory was based on a royal dispensation, I believe. And the first known mention of Jews in public documents refers to the admissibility of Sephardim, Spanish Portuguese, who had been expelled from Spain in 1492 and from Portugal in 1497. Some of these were given special dispensation to enter Norway. Now, I think while Norway was part of the Danish kingdom from 1536 to 1814, Denmark introduced a number of religious restrictions, both to uphold the Protestant Reformation in general and against Jews in particular. I think most notably, I think it was in the year, if I'm not mistaken, 1569, we will actually see this take place. What happened in 1569? I think Frederick II, he ordered, if I'm not mistaken, that all foreigners in Denmark had to affirm their commitment to 25 articles of faith central to Lutheranism on a pain of deportation for forfeiture of property and death. The earliest recorded direct mention of Jews occurred in documents published in the 17th century, when I think there was a group of Portuguese Jews who were allowed to settle in Norway. Restrictions would be lifted for Sephardic Jews, already established as merchants in Altona, with Christian, I think the 4th or the 6th, I'm not sure, took over the town. Christians also issued the first letter of safe passage to a Jew, someone named Albert Dionis, in 1619, and on June the 19th, 1630, general amnesty was granted to all Jews permanently in residence in Gluckstadt, including the right to travel freely throughout the kingdom, I believe, over there. So that's very interesting. I think in this condition, the existence of anti-Semitism can be considered negligible because the traditional Jewish prejudice often stemmed from the perception that the Jews control the economic, political, and social spheres of a specific European society. However, this argument, let's say, attempt to downplay anti-Semitism, obviously internally contradictory, since that perception of Jews is itself one of the most prominent and enduring signs of anti-Semitism. I think the European Enlightenment led to moderate easing of restrictions for Jews in Denmark, Norway, especially in Denmark's southern areas and cities. Some Jewish families, let's say, that had converted to Christianity settled in Norway, so we don't celebrate that in this channel. Writers of the time increased interest, let's say, in Jewish people, including Ludwig Holberg, who figured Jews as a comical, let's say, figure in most of his plays. And in 1742, the Jewish history from the beginning of the world continued to the present day was a play, I think, written that presented Jews to some extent in conventional, unfavorable stereotypes, but also raising the question about mistreatment of Jews in Europe. You could argue over here. So anti-Semitism in another specific form. Consequently, as stereotypes against Jews started entering the awareness of the general public during the Enlightenment, there was also those who rose in opposition to some, if not all, of the online hostility. I think Lutheran minister, some Niels Hertzberg, was one of those who wrote against Norwegian prejudice, ultimately influencing the latter votes on the constitutional amendment to allow Jews to settle in Norway over here, friends. Anyone tuning in live, exploring the history of Norway, I'll just let you see some scenes over here. We're going to continue. Just take a half-minute break. Okay, thanks everyone for being patient. We're exploring the history of the Jewish community of Norway on the special edition. We've already spoke about approximately 40 countries here. Let's talk about the repeal and the initial immigration. The deportation of Jews who had either come to Norway by accident or, like say, in good intentions or faith, caused some embarrassment among Norwegians. The first who advocated for a repeal was a poet named Andreas Munch in 1836, but I think it was Henrik Wergeland who became the leading champion for the Jews of Norway. I believe it's reported, chronicled over there. Now, the 10th parliamentary session, 1842, that was a pivotal time. Henrik Wergeland was the son of Nicoli Wergeland, one of the members at the Constitutional Assembly, who had most strongly objected to admitting Jews to the country. The younger Wergeland had long harbored prejudice against Jews, but travels in Europe had changed his mind. He published the pamphlet in Diag I Josegen, I think in 1841, August 1841, arguing passionately for repeal of the clause. On February 1842, his efforts to put the matter to a vote in the Norwegian Parliament was successful when the proposition was referred to the Constitution Committee. Now, I think in September 1842, the motion to repeal won a simple majority, 51 to 43, but failing short of supermajority, 2 to 3, which will fail at that point in time. Parliamentary sessions, 1845, 1848, 1851. Wergeland had submitted a new proposal to Parliament later on the same day that the first repeal had failed. He died, I think, in July 1844, 1845. And I think the Constitution Committee referred their recommendation to repeal exactly a month after he passed away on August 12th. There'll be various versions put to vote, but the most popular version will win 52 votes to repeal, only 47 to keep worse. And I think in 1848 the motion to repeal and 59 to 43, if I'm not mistaken, votes, still failing short of the 2 to 3 required in 1851. Finally, I think the clause was repealed with 93 votes to 10. I think on September the 10th, all remaining legislation related to the ban was repealed by the passage of law on policy of date Hiddelt, if I'm not mistaken, law, let's say, regarding the repeal of a hitherto permanent prohibition against Jews in the realm over there. Very interesting over here. Welcome everyone, if you are new to the channel. We are exploring the history of the Jewish community of Norway over here. I think there were fears that Norway could be, let's say, overwhelmed by Jewish immigration at that point in time. Following the repeal, only about 25 Jews immigrated to Norway before 1870, very small enough. There was pogroms, I think, in Tsarist Russia. The immigration accelerated somewhat in the late 19th century and early 20th century. By 1910, there was about 1,000 Jews in Norway over there. Though the minority was small and widely dispersed, several stereotypes of Jews gained currency in the Norwegian press and popular literature in the early 20th century. I think there were books, let's say, written by authors Rudolf Munz and Ovre Richer Fritsch. Jews are described as sadistic and obsessed with money. You can see the anti-Semitism over there within regards to this. Attorney Elvin Saxland published a pamphlet in 1910, which was characterized in 1922 as anti-Semitic smut literature by a writer, I think, in Dagbladet. And very much in 1920, the Protocols of the Elder Zion was published in Norway under the title The Den Nye Verdisig, I think, if I'm not mistaken. In 1916 was a Norwegian writer named Mikael Silton published an anti-Semitic periodical called the Nationalistic Tidskrift. And I think in 1917 he started using unfortunately, the swastika as a symbol several years before Hitler did, actually. And the periodical was obviously racist in nature, published anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. The periodical itself declared itself as only Norwegian journal that studies in-depth Jewish truth lies to events in the world and here at home, and so on and so forth over here. So that's very, very interesting. And now, I think someone named Niels Christian Ditchev, also Norwegian diplomat, who in the late 1930s was posted to Warsaw, Poland. In the spring of 1939, he set up a transit station in Warsaw for Jewish refugees from Czechoslovakia that had been sent there throughout the sponsorship of the Nanens Heppen. And Ditchev arranged for refugees to receive food, clothing, transportation to Gdynia, Poland, where they boarded the ships bound to Norway. And I think Nansen was a Norwegian humanitarian organization founded by someone named Odd Nasser, if I'm mistaken, and in 1936 to provide a safe haven and assistance in Norway for Jewish refugees from areas in Europe under Nazi control. The sanctuary in Norway was only short-lived, though, however. At that point in time, I'm just going through a bit of history. Unfortunately, Nazi Germany invaded Norway on 9th of April 1940, and a number of Norwegians were immediately arrested. And 2 months later, the occupying force established the first prisoners' camp at Ulvin, outside Bergen. Many Jews who could fled the country. Nearly 2,000 of the Jews in Norway fled from Norway. Of these, around 900 were smuggled out the country by the Norwegian resistance movement, mostly to Sweden, but some to the United Kingdom also. And in 1942, before, let's say, there was, I think, deportations started, there were at least 2,173 Jews in Norway. Of these, 1,643 were Norwegian citizens, 240 foreign, and 290 stateless. At least 765 Jews died in German sands. More than half of the Norwegians who died, and only between 28 and 34 of those deported would survive. Their continued imprisonment in camps following their deportation, and around 25 of these returned to Norway after the war. So very, very interesting. Anyone tuning in live, we are exploring the history of Norway. We'll just let you see some scenes of the outside, and we're going to come back just in half a minute. Yeah, shalom everyone. Let's speak about a famous figure of that point in time. Someone Henrik Wergeland, a bit more within regards to him. He lived between 1808 till 1845. He was a Norwegian writer, poet. He had a prolific playwright. He was a polemist, a historian, and a linguist. He is described as a leading pioneer, let's just say, of development of distantly Norwegian literature, heritage of modern Norwegian culture. So I think he would die in Norway. He was very young, 37 years old. I think in Oslo. And he covered literature, theology, history, contemporary politics, social issues, science, and was very, very famous. He was older son of someone Macaulay Wergeland, who had been a member of the Constitutional Assembly at Eidsvoll in 1814, if I'm not mistaken. And his younger sister was Camilla Collett, and the younger brother, Major General Joseph Frog's Oscar Wergeland. And I think he learned in the Royal Frederick University in 1825, he graduated in 1829, and he became a symbol of fight or celebration or constitution at 17th of May, which was later become as a Norwegian Nationalist Day. He became let's say a public hero in Norway after the infamous Battle of the Square in Christiania, and he was much more can be said. I think also we had to point out, notably the Jewish community of Oslo, which is our class over here, pays their respects at his grave on 17th of May in appreciation of all his successful efforts to allow Jews into Norway. So he's a key figure who allowed Jewish people to come into Norway. He did early poetry in the year 1829. We have to point out over there, and would write down various other books. We have to point out he became a power literature, had enthusiastic preaching of doctrines of the French July Revolution of 1830, make him very, very well known. And he would write various famous essays, if I'm not mistaken, over there also. So that's very, very interesting. Well, let's just go back a bit about the Sephardic community. They were granted permission to enter Norway, then part of Denmark, I think in the 17th century. That was under King Christian IV, albeit it was small. And there was, I think the Sephardim were exempt from all these bans, if I'm not mistaken. We know that the primary Jewish communities currently are in Oslo and in Trondheim. The vast majority of people are Ashkenazi. And we're going to speak about Rabbi Michael Melchior in a minute. He was the father of Denmark's Rabbi Jared Melchior, if I'm not mistaken. And just a bit of history with regards to him. Anyone tuning in live, welcome to our community. As we explore the history, we're just going to take another break for a minute and continue. Okay, thanks everyone for being patient here as we're exploring the Jewish community of Norway here on this special edition. Let's speak about Rabbi Michael Melchior. Who was he? Or who is he? He's still alive. He's about 70 years of age, 71. He was born in January 31st, 1954, a Jewish Orthodox thinker, activist. He is a former Minister of Social and Diaspora Affairs, a former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and a former member of the Knesset from Maimad. He is a rabbi, I think, currently of the community in Talpiot in Jerusalem, Beit Boya, while he has still the title as a Chief Rabbi of Norway currently. So he's been very, very much decorated with various different positions in Israel, political positions. He's a descendant of 7 generations of rabbis in Denmark. The Melchior was born in Copenhagen, in Denmark. We haven't spoken about that many Danish rabbis in the series. In 1954, his grandfather was Rabbi Marcus Melchior. He helped, let's say, orchestrate, I think, the escape of Danish Jews during the Nazi occupation of Denmark, and served as the country's chief rabbi until he passed away. This was in 1969. Rabbi Michael was ordained as an Orthodox rabbi at the famous Yeshivat HaKotel of Jerusalem in 1980. Soon afterwards, he returned to Scandinavia to serve as chief rabbi of Norway. In 1986, he immigrated to Israel, settled down in Jerusalem, while he will have the honorary title as chief rabbi of Norway. So I think Rabbi Melchior will actually enter politics with the Maimad party when Rabbi Yehuda Amital was appointed minister without a portfolio after the assassination of the Prime Minister at the time, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. This was in, I think, in November 1995. Rabbi Melchior would serve as Rabbi Amital's assistant and was selected chairman of the managing committee of the Maimad party in 1995. Now, I think in 1999 elections, he would run as part of One Israel Alliance with the Labour Party and Gesher, and he would win a seat. With this seat, he was, I think, appointed the Minister of Social and Diaspora of Affairs, a very prominent position over there, on the 5th of August 1999. A post he would hold until Ariel Sharon became Prime Minister in 2001. Rabbi Melchior was re-elected to Knesset as a member of the Joint List in 2003-2006, and would continue his alliance with the Labour Party. In 2008, he broke away and ran a partnership with the Green Movement, I think in 2009 elections, but wouldn't win a seat at that point in time. And I think in 2012, December the 14th, he said that he would quit the Knesset elections at that point in time. It was. But as part of official roles in the Knesset, Israeli government, he was involved with Birthright Israel, an organization that brought over 200,000 young Jews to explore heritage of Israel. And he established a number of civil organizations that focus on issues he dealt with in his, let's say, parliamentary activities, education, inter-Jewish relations, environment, economics, and Arab-Israel peace. He founded a Yachad Council, which promoted dialogue between religious and secular Jews, and served as an honorary chairman of the Citizens Accord Forum between Jews and Arabs in Israel. CAF conducted activities that say promoted civic engagement, encouraged active citizenship, and inspired members of the public to play an active, let's say, role, let's just say, in of itself. And yeah, very, very interesting. I think, let's say, really, really did try and do Arab, like try and liaise and works different, let's say, different branches of Judaism also, we have to point out over there, like especially with the ultra-Orthodox also. While serving in Knesset, he became concerned about the growing polarization between different Jewish sectors. One, let's say, contributing factor was the division of students in different education streams, religious, secular, ultra-Orthodox, Arab. These divides in schools strengthened polarization between Jewish sectors. As a response, I think in 2001, Rabbi Melchior established Meitarim, a network of pluralistic Jewish schools in Israel where religious and secular students can grow up and learn together in kindergarten, schools, post-military institutions in a non-coercive approach, enabling multiple interpretations and expressions of Jewish heritage. To take responsibility for tolerance and the establishment of a collective narrative. I think in 2001, Meitarim had cemented its experimental infrastructure and curricula to over 15,000 students and instructors in collaboration with 120 educational institutions, if I'm not mistaken. In 2002, Rabbi Melchior initiated, together with, interestingly, was corresponding with Palestinian counterparts, to say, some of the Sheikh Talat Saida, an interreligious summit in Alexandria, if I'm not mistaken. And I think many people will attend the Grand Sheikh Wood, Hamad Said Tantawi, Archbishop of Canterbury, and Rabbi Eliyahu Bakshi Daron, who was Israel's chief rabbi. Very interesting enough. I think he had correspondence with Eli Wiesel. They established a Mosaic Center for Interreligious Cooperation, Middle East Religious Peace Initiative, to, let's say, lead the implementation of the principles of the Alexandria Declaration, and continue to serve as both chair of the Mosaic branches. I think he's also a member of the Elijah Interfaith Institute, Board of World Jewish Religious Leaders. So he really championed and celebrated pluralism, as I say. He's, it's a very, very interesting. I think they have a second branch, Mosaic, is a center for the conflict of resolution by agreement, which I think Rabbi Melchior would also serve as a chairman. The center, I think, serves as a professional address for establishing understandings, agreements, if I'm not mistaken, and between individuals, organizations, groups, and communities. The center believes in every person's ability to resolve conflicts and operate in cooperation with the 8 tools from the realm of meditation. We have to point out, Mosaica supports activities of 44 mediation and dialogue centers across the country with the aim of making activities accessible to an array of communities in Israel. Thus, individuals, groups, and communities contribute to a cohesive and respectful Israeli society, we have to point out. Yeah. So many people will see some of his comments more on the controversial and extreme. He apparently said that some of the extremist Islamic leaders, including leaders of Hamas, are ready for peaceful coexistence since 2012. We see how they was definitely very wrong about that after what happened on October 7th. And I think he had other initiatives, something called Kulanu, to strengthen the Jewish character of the state of Israel, enhance democracy, foster unity through projects known as Chagim B'Kehila, holidays in the community, programs which provided religious services for secular Jews for many of the Jewish holidays. I think they work with Teva Ivri to launch a Shemitah Israelit program. Other Kulanu programs including Yom Kippur Shel Kulanu, Biyachad, Shed Jewish Democratic Society, Meitarim, Inclusive Jewish Education Network, and Shemitah Israel in coordination with Teva Ivri, if I'm not mistaken. And I think involved himself in economic issues. He co-founded the Israel Civic Action Forum, which promotes higher taxation on income from the extraction of natural resources and the use of tax income for higher government spending to increase government spending on welfare, education, and health. I think in 2041, he, along with someone named Hadassah Froman of Tekoa and Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun of Alon Shvut, participated at the Gush Etzion morning, where a kidnapping that was famously of 3 yeshiva students took place on June 2014. They were found dead on June 30th, 2014, and are believed to have been killed shortly after being kidnapped. A very high-profile case at that point in time. He was a recipient of the Norwegian Award for Tolerance and Bridge Building on the Nobel Institute, I think in 1988, the Church of England's Coventry International Prize for Peace and Reconciliation, the Lee Haber Prize for the Promotion of Religious Tolerance and Cultural Pluralism. On January 2016, he was awarded the FRRME, Foundation for Relief and Reconciliation in the Middle East, Annual Peace Prize 2015 at the House of Lords in London, and was awarded the Jean Nussebaum in April 2019 and Eleanor Roosevelt International Award for Excellence at the Global Summit on Religion, Peace, Security in Geneva, if I'm not mistaken, over there. So he's very well decorated, you have to point out. Anyone tuning in live, welcome to our community as we're exploring a few highlights within regards to the history of Norwegian Jewish community over here on this special edition here. I've spoken about maybe about 40 countries here on this series already. I think going back to Norway as a whole, in March 1996, the Norwegian government appointed a committee to establish what happened to Jewish property during World War II, determine what extent assets property was restored after the war. In June 1997, the committee delivered a divided report. I believe they split into majority, minority, and I think the majority view of uncovered losses was estimated to be 108 million Norwegian krone, based on the value of krone in May 1997. The minority view of uncovered losses was 330 million KR. May 1998, the Prime Minister of Norway, Prime Minister Bondevik, proposed 450 million KR, covering both the collective and an individual restitution. In March 1999, the Stortingent voted to accept the proposition for 450 million KR. The collective part, totaling 250 million, was divided into 3. And funds sustained the Jewish community in Norway. I think it was part of this big fund itself. It was support for development outside Norway, traditions, let's say, and culture, which the Nazis wished to exterminate, to be distributed by the foundation, where the executive committee members were to be appointed, one each of the Norwegian government and the parliament, I think, and the World Jewish Congress, World Jewish Restitution Organization, Elie Wiesel, suggested to lead the executive committee. And there was a formation, I think at that point in time, of the National Museum of Tolerance, established as the Norwegian Center for Studies of Holocaust and Religious Minorities, if I'm not mistaken. 40 million KRV dedicated to that. In January 2012, there was about 1,500 Jewish people living in the country as a whole. The number of registered religious Jewish communities have been declining in recent years, and 747 in 2015, most were based in Oslo. 2 synagogues in Norway, one in Oslo, one in Trondheim. The Oslo synagogue runs a full cradle-to-grave range of facilities, including kindergarten and cheder. They both also have outreach programs and gather still functioning groups in Bergen and Stavanger. In June 2004, Chabad Lubavitch would also establish, I believe, a permanent community over there, if I'm not mistaken. We have to point out over there. And like in most places they do. They have a renewal rabbi in Oslo who organizes services and activities. And there's a society for progressive Judaism also in Oslo. It's not orthodox, I would assume, but that doesn't exist, I think. The Jewish community in Norway is represented by Det Mosaic Trossamfund, the Mosaic community, affiliated to the World Jewish Congress. Other Jewish organizations, B'nai B'rith, Wiso, B'nai Akiva, Keren Kayemet, they help Jews home, kosher meals on wheels, Jewish study circles, a home for the elderly. There's also a Jewish community centre in Trondheim, as mentioned about before. Norwegian Jews are well integrated into Norwegian society. Prominent among them, people like Joe Benkow, the former president of the Stronget, Leo Ettinger, Bertolt Grunewald, both notable psychiatrists, Robert Levin, a pianist, writer, he happens to be actress, and Mona Levin also, and Bente Kahan, an actress and singer. If I'm not mistaken, I think some of them are still living, if I'm mistaken. The Oslo synagogue, what is it? Obviously, Orthodox Jewish synagogue. The Det Mosaic Trossamfund congregation was established in 1892, and the present building was erected in 1920, I believe. Its architectural historian, someone named Karol Hersel-Krinsky, describes a 2-story tall stucco building with a round tower topped with a spire supporting a Star of David, as resembling a simple, charming country chapel. King Harold V and Crown Prince Haakon visited the synagogue, I believe, in June 2009. I think in 2005 there was a shooting attack. It was the site for 2006 shooting attack. So I think 2006, suspected by police to have been perpetrated by 4 men in the car. No one was injured. 4 allegedly were the 29-year-old criminal turned Islamist Arfan Bhatti, of Pakistani origin, a 28-year-old Norwegian Pakistani, a 28-year-old Norwegian foreign origin, and a 26-year-old Norwegian. Bhatti was acquitted for terror charges and convicted for co-conspiracy to the shooting, which was instead judged as coarse vandalism. The 3 other men were acquitted of all charges reported over. So you could argue that that was a very a weak response to some degree. Okay, now let's speak about another chief rabbi that was in Norway of yesterday. Some of them Rabbi Isaac Julius Samuel. And there's actually an interesting article here on the Haaretz website, which I recommend everyone to read. It's titled, "This Day in Jewish History, Norway Chief Rabbi Who Stayed with His Flock Dies in Auschwitz." I'm not sure the date when this was actually written, but I'll say with the article. Isaac Samuel was a threat very clearly and had even been warned by the Nazis to leave. He refused to abandon his community, so it was like a hero a bit. I think December 16th, 1942 was the day that Isaac Julius Samuel, the chief rabbi of the tiny Jewish community of Norway, died in Auschwitz. He was one of the country's 740 Jews, about half the community who perished in the Holocaust. Although he had the opportunity to flee Norway before the anticipated German deportations, Rabbi Samuel chose to stay put, telling his wife, "I, as a rabbi, shall not leave my community in this dangerous hour." And Isaac, yes, let's explore a bit within regards to him. He was born in 1902 on December 19th. He was just under 40 when he passed away in the western German town. Yes, so he would study in Yeshiva in Frankfurt and was ordained as a rabbi in 1929, famous Berlin's Hildesheimer Rabbinical Seminary over there. And I think it was, he would study psychology, philosophy at Humboldt University in, if I'm not mistaken, became activist in the Mizrahi religious Zionistic movement in 1929-1927. He served as a delegate to the World Zionist Congregation. He also took a leadership role in the World Congress of Shabbat Observers if I'm not mistaken. In 1930, he would marry Rabbinit Henriette Jetty Pollock, descendants of rabbis. Half a century before the marriage, one of her uncles had written a prison article warning the continent's Jews that it would be dangerous for them to remain in Europe in decades to come, and suggesting they depart for Palestine. That's what they said over. Samuel and Henriette, however, moved across the North Sea to Norway, where he was offered a rabbinical pulpit. The same year, the couple married. He learned Norwegian, began lecturing and teaching in it. He contributed frequently to Jewish publications and was active in the Jewish National Fund. The couple had 3 children, Elchanan, Amos, and Esther. I think on the night between April the 8th, April 9th, 1940, the Germans invaded and occupied Norway, anticipating, let's say, a British advance into the country. At the time between 1600 to 1700, Jews were living there. The Jews had been permitted to live in the country, obviously, since mid-19th century. Approximately 200 women were stateless refugees from other parts of Europe. In 1942, Jews had to be identified as such in their identity cards, and by late summer, the first steps to arrest and deport Jews were taken. Samuel was among the first group of Jewish men, if I'm not mistaken, that were taken to the Gestapo for questioning. Testifying in Jerusalem in 1961 at Adolf Eichmann trial, Henriette Samuel said her husband understood that he was being warned to flee when the Gestapo commander asked him. One of the times he was questioned, "Are you still here?" That is when Samuel told his wife that he had no intention of leaving the people. On 2nd of September 1942, Samuel was told to report for the 5th or 6th time to the Gestapo office in Oslo. This time he did not return, nor was he ever heard from again. I think it was on November 21st that year, a member of the Norwegian resistance, Ingeborg Sletten Fostervedt, told Henriette Samuel that the previous day, Isaac Samuel and the other dozen men were arrested with him, had been taken from the Grini concentration camp outside of Oslo and deported to Germany. In 1945, after the war, the family confirmed that Samuel had been, I think, sent from Germany to Auschwitz, where he died a short time later. I don't think it's clear whether he was murdered in the gas chambers, as the Bad Arnson tracing service says, or collapsed and died after a day of hard labour, as an Auschwitz survivor had testified. I think the rest of his family survived the Holocaust, aided by the same women who informed Henriette Samuel that her husband had been deported, along with Sigrid Helensson Land, both of whom were later recognised by Yad Vashem as righteous Gentiles. Henriette and her 3 children escaped to Sweden on the night of December 3rd, 1944. That was a way another 850 Norwegian Jews would survive the war, if I'm not mistaken. The surviving Samuels immigrated to Palestine in 1946. I think in 2004, Esther Samuel Khan, the daughter of Isaac and Henrietta, won the Israel Pride for her work in statistics. We have to point it out. There's kosher food available in Norway since 1929, but I think shechita has been forbidden in Norway since 1929. Kosher meat is imported. There's some kosher food in Norway, mainly in Oslo, but the government prohibition of shechita made access to kosher food more difficult. Jewish education there is for the children and young people, training in Judaism and Jewish culture. The Jewish community of Oslo runs a kindergarten and an institute for the elderly. According to the Jewish community of Norway, there are, I believe, very few Jews living in Norway, and therefore there is no demand for Jewish education. Young Norwegian Jews known as the Jewish Pathfinders and inspired by the Sami Pathfinders are employed to visit upper secondary schools around the country to make the Jewish minority more visible, demonstrate the diversity among Jews in Norway, and spread knowledge and help reduce prejudices. Activities held in classrooms usually last, I think, as many as 90 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Few Norwegians youths have met Jews, and an important goal of the visit is to, let's say, put a face on the young Jews in Norway, if I'm not mistaken. That's something we have to point out over here. So anyone tuning in live, welcome to our community as we're exploring the Jewish community of Norway here on the special edition. Let's talk about Jewish media there. Also, a community produced magazine called Hatikwa. Additionally, additional textbooks there are about Jews and Judaism are reviewed to better represent the Norwegian Jews of today. Jewish and minority newspaper Goldberg operates from 2007 to 2013, 2017 to 2020. Articles on Jewish and other minority issues to broader Norwegian public. The Jewish Museum in Oslo previously produced a podcast which is no longer active. The Jewish Museum, however, is still active in several projects aimed at resulting in books or different topics. Ak Oive is a privately initiated Jewish podcast offering listeners a Jewish perspective on relevant topics, if I'm not mistaken. I think, there's various institutions there, Jewish culture, Judaism, Norwegian Center for Holocaust and Minority Studies, the Foundation Archivet, and the Falstad Center, if I'm not mistaken. And they've got diplomatic relations with Israel. They've played a key role in bringing together Israeli and Palestinian leaders, which resulted in the Oslo Accords. And let's say the failure of the Accords to deliver has placed pressure on diplomatic relations between Israel and Norway, with the Oslo being critical at Israel's handing of Gaza as a general thing. And much could be said within regards to that. Over here, friends, over here. So, friends, this is just a, let's just say, a synopsis over here of the Jewish community of Norway. A special treat. We are going to leave you with some scenes over here, of beautiful scenes from a journey of Bet Shemesh to Jerusalem. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're here, and enjoy, friends, over here, and enjoy the Torah content and the traveling content over here as a special edition over here. And I'll come and join you in a few minutes' time. So watch your space and enjoy the journey.
איפה התיק שלי? אני תבדקי שיש לך חתימה, אני שומעת
תחנה הבאה, מסף צורה. נוסעים יקרים, יש לבצע תיקוף באמצעות היישומון הסלולרי או בכרטיס הרב-קו בכל נסיעה. המשך נסיעה טובה.
רב-קו. כן?
38. התחנה הבאה, שדרות יהודה בן זאב, שדרות הדקל. יהודה בן זאב, שדרות הדקל. התחנה הבאה, שדרות יהודה בן זאב, דוד רזיאל. נוסעים יקרים, יש לבצע תיקוף באמצעות היישומון הסלולרי או בכרטיס הרב-קו. בכל נסיעה, המשך נסיעה טובה. התחנה הבאה, בן זאב, מנדלר. בן זאב, רש"י. התחנה הבאה, רש"י, בן זאב. נוסעים יקרים, יש לבצע תיקוף באמצעות היישומון הסלולרי או בכרטיס הרב-קו. בכל נסיעה, המשך נסיעה טובה. רש"י, בן זאב. התחנה הבאה, מעפילי אגוז, רש"י. מעפילי אגוז, רש"י. מעפילי אגוז, ראובן. אגוז, ראובן. התחנה הבאה, שדרות נהר הדן, סטבנית. נוסעים יקרים, יש לבצע תיקוף באמצעות היישומון הסלולרי או בכרטיס הרב-קו. בכל נסיעה, המשך נסיעה טובה. זמנית. התחנה הבאה, שדרות נהר הדן ב'. שדרות נהר הדן ב'. התחנה הבאה, שדרות נהר הדן. שדרות נהר הדן. התחנה הבאה, נחל סורק, נחל הקישון. נוסעים יקרים, יש לבצע תיקוף באמצעות היישומון הסלולרי או בכרטיס הרב-קו. בכל נסיעה, המשך נסיעה טובה. נחל סורק, נחל הקישון. נחל סורק, נחל משמר. נחל סורק, נחל משמר. התחנה הבאה, נחל סורק, נחל נחשון. נחל סורק, נחל נחשון. הבאה, נחל סורק. לכיש. נוסעים יקרים, יש לבצע תיקוף באמצעות היישומון הסלולרי או בכרטיס הרב-קו. בכל נסיעה, המשך נסיעה טובה. נחל סורק. לכיש. הבאה, נחל איילון, נחל דולב. נחל איילון, נחל דולב. התחנה הבאה, נחל דולב א'. נחל דולב א'. הבאה, נחל דולב. קטלב. נוסעים יקרים, יש לבצע תיקוף באמצעות היישומון הסלולרי או בכרטיס הרב-קו. בכל נסיעה, המשך נסיעה טובה. נחל דולב. קטלב. התחנה הבאה, נחל דולב. נחל תמנה.
Hi, shalom everyone. Then you're watching me live. Sorry about that. We took a short break where I showed you a short tour of Israel over here. So I think in this film we're going to wish you well over here. Thanks for everyone watching. You've got a tour of different parts of Israel while we're watching. We're speaking about the Norwegian Jewish history here on this special edition. And as a community, if you haven't subscribed yet and you're tuning in live, please subscribe to the channel. It's got some fantastic content over here. We've done tours all over Israel today and really explored a lot of importances within regards to Judaism, imbuement, let's just say, and so on and so forth. So wishing you all a fantastic day, friends, and be well. And please don't forget, join the channel. We are trying to get to at the moment as many as hopefully 8,500 subscribers. The goal is by Kamot Bezrat Hashem, the start of the Hebrew month of Shvat. Let's see if we can get to it. Some last scenes here of the city of Bet Shemesh. Just really fantastic people out there. As we're in a nice neighborhood. And we've recorded already about 40 different countries we've explored within Jewish community histories already, which is absolutely phenomenal. Just recording this in the famous Dolev Street over here in Bet Shemesh, which is beautiful, just by Nachal Basor and various other places. So wishing you well, take care, and thanks for watching.